On July 9th, 1776, a crowd swarmed onto Bowling Green on the lower tip of Manhattan and celebrated the reading of the Declaration of Independence by pulling down a life-sized equestrian statue of George III. The fallen monarch made his own contribution to the American Revolution when his melted majesty was turned into 42,088 bullets for the American Army. What was New York like before the Revolution? We have an excerpt from the journal of an intrepid lady named Madame Sarah Kemble Knight. She had ridden on horseback all the way from Boston.
The city of New York is a pleasant, non-compacted place, sprawling on a commodious river which is a fine harbor for shipping. The people are sociable to one another and courteous and civil to strangers. Their diversion in the winter is riding sleighs about 2 to 4 miles out of town, where they have houses of entertainment at a place called the Bowery.
By November 1776, New York City had fallen to the British, and it remained under their control until the end of the war. That's when another crowd gathered on the Battery to watch the final evacuation of the city by the occupying forces. This commodious river, as Madame Knight described it, was the Hudson. To British General John Burgoyne, it was the lifeline of the American colonies. The strategy of Gentleman Johnny, as he was known to his troops, meant marching south along the Champlain-Hudson corridor, joining up with the army of General William Howe, and dividing the colonies, thus winning the war from the side of Canada, as he put it. 2 years earlier, in 1775, another interesting personality passed through this upper part of New York State. He was Ethan Allen, commander of Vermont's Green Mountain Boys. And in a daring pre-dawn raid, he and his men crossed Lake Champlain and surprised the sleeping British garrison at Fort Ticonderoga. They captured the fort without firing a shot, along with tons of ammunition and its 87 cannons. The cannon were hauled to Massachusetts, where the Patriots used them to drive the British out of Boston the following winter. In 1777, Burgoyne recaptured Fort Ticonderoga and continued his march south. On September 19th, he met the Americans at a place called Freeman's Farm, where he won a narrow victory. 3 weeks later, in the Second Battle of Saratoga, the British were defeated, and this was the turning point of the Revolution. The American victory brought about a moral boost at home, credit abroad, and most important, it brought France into the war on the American side. After his surrender, Burgoyne was an honored house guest in the Albany home of his recent adversary, General Philip Schuyler. When the two gentlemen met in these elegant rooms, they may not have been aware that they had just fought one of history's 10 most important battles. Around this time, the ships of British Commander Sir Henry Clinton were moving up the Hudson. And later, to prevent such a reoccurrence, a massive chain was stretched across the river at West Point, a place which Washington referred to as the key to America. West Point, which became the United States Military Academy, was the focal point of one of the best-known stories of the American Revolution, and an event which made the name of Benedict Arnold synonymous with traitor. On August 3rd, 1780, Major General Benedict Arnold was given command of these fortifications. However, for over a year, he had been secretly negotiating with the British through one Major John André. Arnold had a meeting with André, who had come ashore from the HMS Vulture, which waited for him off Croton Point. The meeting took longer than expected, however, and when daylight came, the Vulture was fired upon and forced downriver. Having to return by horseback, he was captured near Tarrytown, and the plans, evidence of Arnold's treason, were found in one of his boots. West Point was saved, the traitor Arnold fled, and the gallant go-between Major André was hanged as a spy at the village of Tappan, but buried twice, once at Tappan and later at Westminster Abbey. Loyalties to the crown become more understandable when you go back to the time before the Revolution. This is Fort Johnson near Schenectady, New York. It was built by William Johnson, a wealthy landowner and a promoter of settlements in the Mohawk Valley. He was a rather remarkable man who got along well with the Indians. He was able to converse with them in their own language, and he was a close friend of the powerful Mohawk chief Joseph Brant. And so it isn't surprising that when the war came, Sir William's son John was a Tory. For so many, the Revolution meant a difficult choice, a choice between traditions and the challenge of becoming part of a new tomorrow. When you hear the bells of Emmanuel Episcopal Church blending with the voices of Newcastle's madrigal singers, you know it's this Delaware town's annual open house. A place that traces its history to the establishment of Fort Casimir by the Dutch back in 1651. When the English, under the Duke of York, captured all the Dutch territory in America in 1664, they called the town Newcastle. The Swedes had ruled here for 13 years, the Dutch for 9. The English stayed in power for 112 years.
Take aim! Get fire!
It was only a reenactment.
In July of 1776, Colonel John Haslet's Delaware militia came into the old courthouse and burned the emblems of royalty in a bonfire on the street.
We took out all the insignia of monarch, all the baubles of royalty, and a merry day we made of it.
Newcastle is not a village or a small town. Its appearance is that of an 18th century city. Many early cities in America once looked like Newcastle. The great difference, of course, is that these cities expanded into greater metropolises, which overshadowed the small centers of the early days, while Newcastle has remained the same.
Lafayette and many other notables were entertained at the Reed House on the Strand. It's an exceptional Georgian mansion built at the end of the 18th century by a son of George Reed, one of Delaware's signers of the Declaration of Independence. The mansion stands today in a nearly perfect state of preservation. All woodwork and hardware original, and the wallpaper shows scenes of old Newcastle. According to local tradition, the American flag first flew in battle at Cooches Bridge on September 3, 1777. This was the only encounter on Delaware soil between British regulars and the Continental Army. In spite of its large Loyalist population, Delaware produced many notable revolutionary leaders. It was the first state to ratify the United States Constitution. That was on December 7, 1787, and the old State House here at Dover, begun in that year, is the second oldest still in use today. Experience must be our only guide, John Dickinson wrote. for reason may mislead us. This man, who called himself a farmer, spent his boyhood on his father's Kent County farm near Dover. He was one of the most vocal opponents of independence among the members of the Second Continental Congress, yet he helped to write both the Articles of Confederation as well as the Constitution. Dickinson's first letter to his countrymen had ended with the words, Concordia res parvae crescunt, small things grow great by concord. In Wilmington, Delaware, is the statue of a man described by John Adams.
Caesar Rodney is the oddest-looking man in the manor. He's tall, thin, and slender as a reed, pale.
He had ridden through the night to break a deadlock in the Delaware delegation at the Second Continental Congress. He arrived in Philadelphia on July 2nd, 1776, in time to vote on Richard Henry Lee's resolution that these united colonies are and of a right ought to be free and independent states. About a third of the Delawareans bitterly opposed this act of rebellion, and the resolution for independence almost failed. A unanimous vote of all the colonies was essential, and this was achieved when Caesar Rodney said,
I believe the voice of my constituents and of all sensible and honest men is in favor of independence, and my own judgment concurs. I vote for independence.
The 56 men who signed the Declaration now represented 13 free and independent states, whereas the First Continental Congress had represented 12 British colonies when it convened nearly 2 years before at Carpenter's Hall. Georgia had not been represented at that first Congress. One of the signers was the remarkable Dr. Benjamin Franklin, author of Poor Richard's Almanac.
Being ignorant is not so much a shame as being unwilling to learn. The doors of wisdom are never shut. Read much, but not too many books. Dost thou love life? Then do not squander time, for that's the stuff life is made of. Experience keeps a dear school, yet fools will learn in no other. Some men grow mad by studying much to know, but who grows mad by studying good to grow? Good sense is a thing all need, few have, and none think they want. A penny saved is a penny earned.
The only street in Philadelphia that has survived literally intact since the 1700s is Elfreth's Alley. In colonial times, the word alley implied a quiet residential lane where craftsmen and artists lived and plied their trades. Each year today, there's an open house here called Elfreth's Alley Fete Day. Let's look at what was going on in the mid-Atlantic states during the 5 months following the signing of the Declaration of Independence. At Brooklyn Heights and Long Island, the Americans are defeated by the British. Nathan Hale is hanged as a spy in New York. Benedict Arnold's fleet action on Lake Champlain prevents a British invasion of the northern colonies. And on December 12th, Congress confers total powers as Commander-in-Chief on George Washington. 13 days later, he crossed the Delaware River with about 2,400 men, and early on the morning of the 26th, attacked Britain's Hessian allies asleep at Trenton, New Jersey. The victory at Trenton was followed by another at Princeton on January 3rd, 1777. During those times that tried men's souls, John Witherspoon, the only clergyman to sign the Declaration of Independence, was president of Princeton College. Because of its geographic location between the Tory capital of New York and the rebel patriot capital of Philadelphia, New Jersey was the crossroads of the Revolution, and 867 battle skirmishes took place in the state. Nearby in Pennsylvania, about 3,000 American soldiers died during the winter encampment at Valley Forge. Others deserted. Those that remained until spring came away new men. They had been drilled by the German Baron von Steuben. The genius of this nation, he wrote, is not in the least to be compared with that of the Prussians, Austrians, or French. There you say to your soldiers, do this, and he doeth it. But here I am obliged to say, this is the reason why you ought to do that, and he does it.
How's the field, Dad? Don't give him home.
Even a new recipe came out of those difficult days. A cook had been ordered by Washington to provide a good meal to cheer the ragged troops. With nothing at hand but some tripe, peppercorns, and scraps, he improvised a dish and named it after his hometown. His Philadelphia pepper pot soup became a popular and very economical fare. Pay scales were rather economical too. They varied according to the military specialty of the individual. A skilled artilleryman, for instance, received more than the ordinary infantry soldier. Basic pay, however, was $6.67 a month for the private soldier, with bonuses for re-enlistment and extra service, of course. This may have been the highest pay soldiers had ever received in any war, but it didn't help the man who had to pay $100 for a pair of boots. Some took no pay for their humanitarian services to others, and it was following the Battle of Brandywine that some 500 wounded Americans were cared for and nursed back to health by the brothers and sisters at the Ephrata Cloister. Founded in 1732 by the mystic Conrad Beissel, it attracted men and women who sought to serve God through lives of austere self-denial. The 1,200-page Martyr's Mirror was published here 29 years before the Battle of Brandywine. At Brandywine, the Continental Army had stood between General Howe's advancing men and Philadelphia. The headquarters of General Washington was this reconstructed stone building, and about a mile away is the house where his aide-de-camp, the Marquis de Lafayette, spent the night after being wounded in the leg. It was said that the roar of the furnace could be heard for miles, and the bright glare from its fire illuminated the surrounding countryside at night. The Cornwall furnace was the forerunner of Pennsylvania's great iron and steel industry. It was established in 1742 by Peter Grubb, who named it in honor of his home county in England. In 1750, the British Parliament attempted to restrict production of iron and steel in the colonies, but nevertheless the output grew. The American colonies, with Pennsylvania the leader, smelted 1/7 of the 18th century world's iron. Their defiance of Britain's restrictions, which were designed to bolster the economy of the empire, gave the colonies an economic independence, which they put to good use in the production of arms during the Revolution. Cornwall produced 42 cannon for the war, and much of the labor was done by German prisoners, many of whom later established their permanent homes in the vicinity. Using their original Perkins hand pumper, the Haddonfield, New Jersey Fire Company shows how a fire was put out in colonial times. This is the second oldest volunteer fire company in continuous service in the United States. Close by is the historic Indian King's Tavern, where the members of the New Jersey Legislature and Council of Safety brushed elbows. The final military campaign conducted by General Washington in the North took place not far from the Jersey shore. It was the Battle of Monmouth, where Molly Pitcher brought water to the thirsty troops and became a legend. General Washington returned to this area of New Jersey and set up his final military headquarters at Rockingham near Princeton. The war had been won, and here in the study of the main house of this farm complex, he composed his farewell address to the armies. The winter before, it was at the New Windsor Cantonment near Newburgh, New York, that Washington had named 3 Connecticut soldiers to receive the honorary badge of military service, which he had created for courageous acts. This became known as the Purple Heart, and it was not given again until 1931.
I'm Lieutenant Barnaby Wilson, 1st Maryland Regiment. Basically what we're trying to do here is to acclimate the people of the 20th century as to what their soldier looked like. The music that we play is authentic 18th century music, played on reproductions of, again, authentic 18th century music instruments. We play French songs, British songs, and American songs. It's interesting, too, that the drum plays an integral part in the field communications in the Army. Literally, an officer could call out a command, his duty drummer would pick it up and could play commands for fire, ceasefire, advance, retreat, officers call, wood call, water call, breakfast call, and NCO's meetings, officers' meetings. So the drum is basically used much like a Morse code system. The rumor that American armies fought behind rocks and trees in the 18th century is pretty much of a fallacy in many areas, because we had to fight the British basically on the same lines that they were fighting in and the rest of Europe.
Annapolis was a town of 2,200 people who fed, clothed, armed, and cared for over 4,000 men when Lafayette transported his troops down the Chesapeake. Because of this, Maryland was referred to as the commissary of the Revolution. All 4 Maryland signers of the Declaration of Independence had homes here in Annapolis. This music box is in the house of Samuel Chase, one of the signers. Chase could look out over his neighbor's house across the street only because Mr. Hammond was a gentleman. Mr. Hammond was building his own house, but promised not to build it higher than 2 stories so that Mr. Chase might still have his view over the harbor. In colonial history, it's rare to find a building attributed to a definite architect. The taste of the owner was the dominating factor, and he, with the help of certain books of designs, worked to achieve his aim with what they called a joiner, one who put together. This Hammond Harwood house was an exception. It was designed by one of the outstanding architects of the time, William Buckland. Signer Thomas Stone was a lawyer who lived in this house. And a few blocks away is the house built in 1765 by another signer, the wealthy William Paca. This is a 35-room mansion recently restored by a self-supporting private organization, Historic Annapolis Incorporated. Paca was described as a handsome and engaging man with a great sense of humor, a member of the city's literary club who became governor of Maryland. The 4th Maryland signer, the only Catholic and the only one to sign more than his name, was Charles Carroll of Carrollton, whose home faced Annapolis Harbor. He was 91 years old when he spaded the first earth for the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad on July 4th, 1828.
We were a rather vigorous and hardy lot, and quite young for the most part. 18 of us were in our 30s, and 3 still in their 20s. Only 7 were over 60. Altogether, we fathered close to 325 children, and one of us, Carter Braxton of Virginia, had 18. On the morning of the 50th anniversary of our signing, 3 of us were still alive. But before the day was over, Tom Jefferson and John Adams had passed away, and I was the only one left of that host of worthies.
I wanted to ask you, do you know what the original 13 states were?
No.
You can't name them?
Mm-mm.
Try to think of one.
America?
How about the only state, the one state that you live in? What's that?
The United States.